Hey, thanks for stopping by. Time to share my thoughts on the long-awaited 7th full-length album from Florida easycore band A Day to Remember with You're Welcome. Now, it's been nearly 5 years since we last had an album from A Day to Remember, the longest gap between releases of their career. I believe there were some setbacks due to mixing delays and unfinished album art, and I believe the pandemic slowed things down a bit, but we finally got it, and it is definitely not what a lot of fans were hoping for after all this time. A Day to Remember is known for combining massively catchy, driven pop-punk melodies with some furious metalcore breakdowns and verses, and they've worked their way to becoming one of, if not the biggest band in the scene, pushing that sound. So they got a lot of ears on them, and most of the fans want to hear the heavy stuff. We want the screams, the blasting punk energy, and the anthemic sing-alongs, and this album is definitely lacking that heavier edge. It's their first album with Fueled by Ramen, one of my favorite labels, but the label has been criticized over the years for kind of bringing a softer, poppier edge to bands on its roster. We found out they joined Fueled by Ramen all the way back in the summer of 2019 when they released the lead single, Ahead of You're Welcome, with Degenerates, a song that jumped out as a pretty big red flag of what the future held for this band. It has a bright, playful energy to it, but it's built around a very tiresome hook. And you know, they bring in some heavy guitar for the quirky synth breakdown of a post-chorus. There's some good bass to the track, some chugs, dashes of punk drumming, and even a bit of a breakdown towards the end that leads to a satisfying hit into that final hook. So on an instrumental level, I'm not cringing at the song, but ultimately that chorus just leaves a bad taste in my mouth, and it does not make for a pleasurable melody to have stuck in my head. I was left feeling much more encouraged after the release of the second single towards the end of 2019 with Resentment. Takes on a modern metalcore sound with dominating synths, chugging guitar, and some wonderfully ear-pleasing double kick. It is a pretty straightforward track, but it lands a nice punch and pulls off a massive hook that I'm finding to be quite addictive, and they give you the breakdown in the bridge that's short-lived, but it still manages to leave its mark.
Welcome to the eye of the tiger, go!
And then last April, we got the third single with Mindreader, and this one had me absolutely hooked. You're not getting any of the heaviness featured on the first two singles, but they make up for that with one of the strongest melodies of their entire discography. I raved about it in my top 30 songs of 2020 video, and at this point, I just don't have much else to say about it. Other than that, it is one hell of an infectious and fun track that has me singing along word for word. It goes down as one of the best songs I've heard from A Day to Remember. And then we went through another several months before we finally heard from them again in November when they released the opening track, Brick Wall, is their fourth single, and I'm not too crazy about it. I mean, it brings back the heavy, but not in a good way. The chorus is pretty much just a breakdown that gets old very fast, and it seems like they didn't really know how to make it flow into the acoustic-backed verses. It feels like a pretty unnatural transition. They do a good job with the pre-chorus, though. It has a very classic A Day to Remember feel to it, and it does make for a solid lead-in to the breakdown hook. And I'm decently happy with the bridge as well. That features some nice, thick, driven guitar, but the final minute, and especially the final 30 seconds, just gets out of hand with the constant stabbing chugs that just aren't that fun. Like, we get it, you're going hard, but really, it turns into less of a headbanger and more of a headache. But then on the opposite side of both the album and their sound, we got the fifth and final single at the end of January with the closing track, Everything We Need, the one primarily acoustic song of the album, and I'm in love with it. You know, as much as fans expect some heavy stuff from these guys, A Day to Remember is no stranger to the acoustic ballad. Their song, If It Means a Lot to You, from '09's Homesick, has gone down as their most popular song to date, though I was actually never swept away with that one. But then there's I'm Already Gone from 2013's Common Courtesy, and for me, that song is right up there with the best I've heard from them. And Everything We Need is joining that group. It is just a beautiful sing-along performance from Jeremy McKinnon. The Campfire sing-along chorus could easily come off as sappy, but it is just so sweet and catchy that I don't have a problem with it. And I especially love the I'm doing buck 20 on I-75, 75, 75. The sing-along pull of that part is ridiculous. So when it comes to the 5 pre-album singles, we got 3 that showed off their heavier side, though only one of those was actually good. And then we got 2 that showed their lighter, poppier side, both of which I found to be pretty outstanding, honestly. And as for the rest of these songs, yeah, there are some more disappointments, but there are a few notable highlights on this. We'll get the disappointments out of the way first, starting with Bloodsucker. It's got some hit to it. It contrasts the soft verses with the blaring shouted hook with the whoa. And yeah, it's got its catchiness, but it's ultimately more on the obnoxious and grating side, and I just don't get much enjoyment out of it. Then there's High Diving, the Life is a Beach song. Yep, that is now a lyric from A Day to Remember, and if you know me, you know I don't really care about lyrics, but this just doesn't really even feel like an A Day to Remember song. It feels kind of childish, and like pretty much everything on this album, there's an easy catch to the melody, but this song is very much lacking any real excitement to it. And then the Dark and Brooding Looks Like Hell. I like the energy of this one, I like the mood, but the melody is pretty plain, and it sounds like Jeremy's vocals are somewhat buried under the reverb of the guitar. He sounds a bit muffled and just kind of covered up in the mix. Viva La Mexico is also pretty meh, but I can't deny that the hook of this one is a fun time. You get that chugging pre-chorus, and the hit delivered with the drop-in hook gets a bit of excitement out of me, but otherwise it is just not that interesting of a song. And then we got a couple of mid-tier tracks on the second half of the album, starting with Only Money, showing the more sentimental side to this album, speaking on the sacrifices made over the years of being on the road. It's actually a very sweet melody that caught my ear on the first listen, and though it's nothing new, I appreciate the message, and it's got a bit of that soft, fist-clenching pull to its hook that made me consider giving it a higher rating, but it's a little too familiar in a way. It doesn't quite hit me in the gut. And the penultimate re-entry picks things up for a bouncy pop rocker with a friendly hook using the ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba. But yeah, when it comes to A Day to Remember, it's just kind of forgettable. But one that fans will definitely not be forgetting is Last Chance to Dance, Bad Friend, easily the heaviest song of the album. We finally get some screams from Jeremy for some pretty furious verses, and then that hook just comes at you with a very driven and sticky melody, and of course that final breakdown. Oh! That is what we want more of from A Day to Remember. And the other fan favorite, Permanent, it keeps it true to what fans have come to expect from these guys, simply by sticking to their familiar rock-heavy approach. And again, just a chorus that fires at you with its gritty and straightforward melody, and also a bridge that smashes you with a pretty juicy breakdown. But of all the deep cuts, the one absolute standout for me is definitely not what fans have come to expect from these guys, and I can imagine most fans disagreeing with me on this, but F.Y.M. Fuck You Money is my favorite deep cut of the album. It's about as simple of a melody as it gets. It follows a very easy stomping beat, and if you are complaining about this album being too poppy, then you probably hate this song. And I don't blame you. There's not much depth to this song, but really, I don't look for meaning in the lyrics. I don't care if it's standard and repetitive. I am just looking for that special feeling, and this one does it with its stupidly catchy hook and it just makes me feel good. I love singing along to it, and I could see it being tons of fun in the live setting. Would be interesting to see how many fans they could get singing along to this one. So there we go, 6 of the 14 songs I'm very happy with. And the other 8, they're definitely not great, but I don't think anything on this album is absolute trash. At the end of it all, it's A Day to Remember. These guys know how to get my head moving, and I really can't say that any of these are straight up terrible. I've rated each song, I've crunched the numbers, and I have settled on a final score of 6.8. And that's going to wrap it up. Thank you for checking this out. Leave a thumbs up if you liked what you saw. Hit the subscribe for more alternative content, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Love to chat. I'll see you next time.